Elena, you still came back.
We chose the wrong daughter.
I stayed, even after everything.
My name is Elena Brooks, and the first time I understood that being the good daughter really meant being the disposable one, I was standing at the edge of our dining room table with my college acceptance letter still trembling in my hand. I was 18. I had spent years earning that envelope. I had studied under flickering kitchen lights while everyone else slept. I had skipped dances, worked weekend shifts at a grocery store, and memorized biology notes in waiting rooms while my mother took my younger sister Sabrina to dance rehearsals, photo shoots, and every emotional emergency she ever managed to create. The letter said I had been accepted into the nursing program at North Lake University. I thought my parents would be proud. Instead, my father folded his hands, my mother avoided my eyes, and Sabrina sat there with fresh lip gloss and a guilty silence that told me she already knew what I was about to hear. My mother said it softly, like that made it smaller. "Elena, the fund is gone." For a second, I genuinely did not understand the sentence. "The fund?" I asked. "What do you mean gone?" My father exhaled through his nose, already irritated that I wasn't making this easy. "We had to use it." I stared at them. Use it. That was the word. Not discuss, not borrow, not ask. Use. Then my mother added the rest. "Your sister needed help. Her tuition deadline came early and we couldn't let her lose her place." I turned and looked at Sabrina. She didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. She just stared at the table and said, "I said I'd pay it back." But even then, we all knew she never would. I had known for years that Sabrina was the center of gravity in our house. When she cried, plans changed. When she failed, excuses appeared. When she wanted something expensive, my parents suddenly became philosophers about sacrifice and family. But when I needed something, they became accountants, practical, stern, measured. They always said I was the strong one. What they meant was, I was the one they believed would survive disappointment quietly. Sabrina had dropped out of one college already. She said the campus made her anxious. Then she decided she wanted to study fashion marketing in Chicago because she had seen some influencer talk about it online, and suddenly that became her destiny. My parents called it her second chance. My dream, apparently, was negotiable. I remember gripping the back of the dining chair so hard my fingers went numb. "That money was for my school," I said. My father finally looked at me then. "And you're smart enough to find another way." I still remember how calm his voice was, as if robbing one daughter to protect the ego of another was not cruelty, as if it was wisdom. My mother reached for my hand, but I pulled it back before she could touch me. "Elena," she said, "your sister is more fragile than you are." That sentence followed me for years. Not because it hurt the most, but because it explained everything. I did not scream. I did not beg. I did not knock over a chair or throw my acceptance letter in their faces. I just went upstairs, sat on the floor of my bedroom, and read that letter again and again until the words blurred. I had worked so hard to build a future, and in one dinner conversation, my parents handed it to someone else like it had never belonged to me in the first place. 2 weeks later, Sabrina left for Chicago with new luggage, a paid dorm deposit, and my future sitting in her account. My father drove her to campus. My mother cried in the driveway. Neither of them cried when I told them I had deferred my admission because I could not afford to go. Instead, my father said, "This doesn't have to ruin your life unless you let it." That was another thing people say when they are standing safely outside the damage they caused. So I found another way. I took more shifts at the grocery store. Then I picked up nights at a diner off Route 8, where truck drivers drank black coffee at midnight and called me sweetheart without meaning anything by it. I enrolled at community college, one class at a time. It took longer. It cost more in pieces. It exhausted me in ways I still cannot explain. But no one could take that path away from me because I built it myself. There were semesters when I slept 4 hours a night. Weeks when I lived on peanut butter, cheap noodles, and hospital vending machine crackers. Days when I thought I might actually break. But I didn't. I became a nurse anyway. Not because my parents believed in me, because I finally stopped waiting for them to. By the time I was 29, I was working at St. Catherine's Medical Center in the step-down cardiac unit. I had the kind of life that looked stable from the outside. A small apartment, a second-hand car that rattled in winter, a coffee maker I trusted more than most people, a handful of friends who knew not to ask too many questions about my family unless they had time for the full answer. My relationship with my parents had become polite and distant, which is sometimes more exhausting than open conflict. We spoke on birthdays, on major holidays, when someone was sick or pretending not to be. Sabrina called even less. Her life existed mostly in filtered photographs. One month she was launching a brand, next month she was traveling. Then she was between opportunities, which in Sabrina's language usually meant someone else was paying for things until they got tired. Every now and then, my mother would mention her with a strange defensive pride, as if repeating Sabrina's glittering version of herself could make it true. I stopped correcting her. I stopped asking questions. I stopped trying to win affection from people who had mistaken my endurance for infinite supply. Then, one rainy Thursday in late October, I was halfway through a double shift when my phone vibrated in the pocket of my scrub top. It was my mother. I almost let it ring out. Something in me said, "Answer." So I did. And the first sound I heard was not her voice. It was panic. "Elena," my mother said, breathless and uneven. "It's your father." I was already moving before she finished the sentence. There are tones of voice you never confuse once you have heard them enough in hospital hallways. Fear has a shape. Her words came in pieces. He had collapsed in the garage. The neighbor called 911. They were taking him to Mercy General. She didn't know what happened. She didn't know what to do. And Sabrina wasn't answering. That last part landed exactly the way old patterns always do. Quietly, predictably, with no surprise left in it. I left my shift to a charge nurse who squeezed my shoulder and said, "Go." The drive back to Maple Hollow took 2 hours and felt like 10 years. Rain dragged silver lines across the windshield. Every red light irritated me. Every mile marker pulled something old back up from the bottom of me. When I got to the emergency department, my mother was still wearing house slippers. Her mascara had collapsed under her eyes. She looked smaller than I remembered. For one suspended second, I saw not the woman who had given away my future, but a frightened older woman whose life had tipped sideways without warning. Then she saw me, stood up too quickly, and started crying in a way I had never seen from her before. Not elegant crying, not controlled crying, real crying. And without thinking, I caught her before she fell. That was how it began. Not with forgiveness, not with closure, with reflex. My father had suffered a stroke, not the kind that kills you quickly, the kind that rearranges power. His right side was weak, his speech was slurred. His blood pressure had probably been out of control for years. The doctors used words like rehab, recovery window, occupational therapy, home modifications, long-term supervision. My mother nodded like she understood. She didn't. By midnight, I was the one asking the right questions. What level of damage? What medications? What would happen after discharge? What warning signs mattered? Could he safely swallow? Who was coordinating follow-up? The attending physician looked at me the way doctors look at people who can translate fear into action. "Are you in medicine?" he asked. "I'm a nurse," I said. And suddenly, the room shifted. I became useful. That happened a lot in my family. I only seemed to fully exist when there was a crisis to manage. My mother kept checking her phone. Still no answer from Sabrina. At 1 a.m, she finally texted back. "In Tulum. Flight tomorrow, maybe. Keep me posted." I read the screen once and handed it back without comment. My mother didn't defend her. That was new. My father drifted in and out through the night. At one point, he opened his eyes, looked straight at me, and tried to say my name. It came out broken, but I understood it. And standing there in that humming hospital room, with monitors blinking and antiseptic in the air, I felt an anger so old it had gone quiet. Because even then, even after everything, when he needed someone steady beside him, it was me. I stayed for 3 days, then 5, then 2 weeks. My apartment sat empty while I used vacation time, traded shifts, and slept in the reclining chair beside my father's hospital bed. Then later in the rehab center when paperwork got messy and my mother started forgetting everything she was told. When we finally brought him home, the house looked exactly the same and completely different. The same framed photos, the same pale kitchen curtains, the same grandfather clock my father used to wind every Sunday evening. But now there was a walker by the hallway wall, and pill bottles lined up like a threat on the counter. My mother had no idea how much help he would actually need. By the second day home, she was already overwhelmed. I installed grab bars in the bathroom. I called insurance. I argued with a pharmacy. I labeled medication trays by hour and color because my mother kept mixing them up. I rearranged the downstairs guest room into a temporary bedroom for my father because the stairs were too risky. Sabrina arrived on the 3rd day in expensive sunglasses, carrying airport perfume and 2 shopping bags full of organic teas she would never remember to brew. She hugged my mother, kissed the air near my father's cheek, told everyone how traumatic this had all been for her. Then she pulled me aside near the laundry room and whispered, "How long are you staying?" I looked at her. "That's your first question?" She crossed her arms. "I'm just trying to understand the plan." That was Sabrina. Even grief had to fit neatly into her schedule. I said, "There is no plan. There's just what needs to be done." She frowned like I had become inconvenient. By that evening, she was already talking about getting back to the city. I told myself I was only staying until things stabilized. A week, maybe 2. Long enough to train my mother, organize appointments, and make sure my father didn't fall in the shower or aspirate during dinner. But families built on old imbalance do not suddenly become fair just because someone gets sick. My mother leaned on me more every day. Can you call the insurance company? Can you check his blood pressure? Can you stay just tonight in case he needs help getting up? Can you talk to the physical therapist because I don't understand these exercises? Can you? And because I knew how to do all of it, I did. Not because I had forgotten what they took from me. Because helplessness in front of me has always triggered action before analysis. That is one of the blessings and curses of being the dependable one. 3 weeks in, I went upstairs to grab extra blankets and passed my childhood bedroom. The door was half open. Inside, it had become storage. Holiday bins, old lamps, a broken fan, boxes of things no one wanted but no one would throw away. I stood there longer than I should have. Sabrina's room across the hall was untouched. The floral comforter still folded at the foot of the bed. Her vanity mirror still polished. Even the bulletin board on the wall still held old photos. She had not lived there in years, but my mother had preserved her space like a shrine. Mine had become overflow. I did not cry. I just closed the door quietly and carried the blankets downstairs. Some hurts don't arrive new. They simply confirm themselves. November blurred into routines. Blood pressure cuffs, rehab transport, soup cooling on trays. My father learning to button shirts with one hand. My mother forgetting to eat because she was too busy worrying and too proud to admit she was slipping. At the hospital, I was praised for being calm under pressure. At home, I was expected to produce that calm for free. Sabrina dropped in whenever it made her look caring. She posted one black and white photo of my father's hand in hers with the caption, "Family is everything." I stared at it while standing at the sink washing dishes and laughed so suddenly it hurt. She stayed 48 hours that visit, spent half of it on the phone, left a mess of skincare bottles in the bathroom, and a speech about how hard this had all been on our mother. Then she kissed my cheek and said, "You're better at this stuff anyway." That sentence nearly cracked something in me. Better at this stuff. As if caregiving was a personality trait. As if exhaustion was a talent. As if history had simply assigned roles and we were all supposed to keep smiling through them. That night, after everyone slept, I sat alone in the kitchen and opened my email. There was a message from my unit manager. A promotion opportunity. Charge nurse track. Applications due Monday. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. Then I closed the laptop without replying. Sometimes the cost of family is not what they take from your past. It's what they keep collecting from your future. The first real crack came in December. My mother had spent the morning pretending she was fine. By noon, she was pale. By 2, she was clutching the kitchen counter with one hand and her chest with the other. The ambulance came for her this time. Stress, uncontrolled blood pressure, dehydration, and a heart condition she had ignored because there had always been someone else to focus on. At the emergency room, she looked at me with a fear so naked it stripped years off her face. "Elena," she whispered, "please don't leave." I wanted to say, "You left me first." Not physically. Worse. You chose my sister over me when it mattered most, and taught me that love in this family was conditional, strategic, and uneven. But she was in a hospital gown with wires on her chest and terror in her eyes. So I said, "I'm here." And I meant it. That was the confusing part. People think forgiveness and care are the same thing. They are not. You can still carry someone through their worst season without pretending they didn't wound you. My father cried for the first time that winter while my mother was admitted overnight. His speech was still uneven, but I understood enough. "I can't do this," he said. For once, I believed him. And still, I stayed. After that, I stopped pretending I was there temporarily. I moved clothes into the downstairs closet. I forwarded bills to my email. I created spreadsheets for medications, appointments, and expenses because the chaos was becoming dangerous. That was when I found out just how bad things really were. Late notices tucked inside cookbooks, mortgage statements my mother had hidden in a sewing basket, a credit card balance big enough to make my chest tighten. And then, one evening, while sorting paperwork at the dining room table, I found a bank transfer confirmation from years ago. The date punched straight through me. It was the exact week my tuition deposit had been due. The amount matched almost all of my college fund, transferred into an account under my mother's name. Memo line: Sabrina, Education Housing Support. I sat there very still. Because betrayal changes shape when you are young. At 18, I had told myself maybe there had been some complicated reason, maybe something urgent, maybe some version of events where it wasn't as deliberate as it felt. But that piece of paper was blunt. No accident, no misunderstanding, no emergency. A decision. A chosen direction of love. My mother walked in while I was still holding it. For a long second, neither of us spoke. Then she looked at the paper, and all the color drained out of her face. She sat down across from me like her knees might not hold. I slid the paper onto the table between us. "How much of it did you think I forgot?" I asked quietly. Her lips trembled. "Elena." "No," I said. "Don't start with my name like that." She stared at the transfer slip for so long, I thought she might pretend not to remember. But old age and fear were finally stripping away the luxury of performance. "We thought you would recover faster," she said. There it was. Not apology, explanation. "We knew it would hurt you," she added. "But we thought Sabrina would fall apart if we didn't help her." I laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "So you bet on the daughter you thought would survive being betrayed." Tears filled her eyes. "You were always so capable." That word again. Capable, strong, resilient. The beautiful labels people pin to your chest when they want permission to abandon you. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the woman who had packed my sister's luggage with my tuition money sitting inside it. "Do you know what that did to me?" I asked. She covered her mouth with her hand and cried, but this time I did not comfort her. Some grief deserves company. Some deserves witness. That night I slept badly and woke up clear. Care, yes, but without blindness, without surrender, without pretending history had not happened just because illness had entered the room. The next blow came from Sabrina, which felt almost comforting in its predictability. She showed up 3 days before Christmas wearing a cream coat that looked too expensive for the weather and carrying a folder she called Practical Options. I already knew I would hate whatever was inside. We sat in the living room while my parents slept. She crossed one leg over the other and spread papers over the coffee table like a consultant arriving to rescue a failing company. "I've been thinking," she said. "This house is too much for them now." I said nothing. She continued, "There are assisted living communities with spa services, meal plans, activity calendars, transportation. Honestly, it might be better for everyone. We could sell this place, use some of the proceeds for their care, and then manage the rest properly." Properly. I looked down at the paperwork, brochures, estimated resale value, a realtor's business card. She had not come home to help our parents. She had come home to organize their reduction into assets. "And who is we?" I asked. She sighed. "Elena, don't be difficult." "No," I said. "Answer the question." She pressed her lips together. "You know I'm better with people. You're better with logistics. We could do this together." There it was again, the same old theft. Not always of money, sometimes of authority, story, labor, moral credit. I folded the papers, placed them back in her folder, and handed it to her. "They're not being sold out from under while they're still alive and scared." Her face hardened instantly. "You always make everything emotional." I almost smiled. It takes a special kind of person to accuse the caretaker of being emotional while standing in her parents' house with real estate brochures. Sabrina left angry, but not before saying something that stayed with me. "You think staying here makes you a saint," she snapped. I answered her more honestly than she deserved. "No, it just keeps me from becoming you." That night, my father asked me to sit beside him after dinner. The Christmas tree lights were on in the corner, reflected faintly in the dark window. His speech was still damaged, but slower meant clearer now. He looked exhausted, older than I had ever seen him. "I knew," he said at last, "what we did to you. I knew." There are confessions you imagine your whole life. In your imagination, they heal something. In reality, they often just arrive too late. "Then why did you let it happen?" I asked. He stared at his own hand for a long moment. "Cowardice," he said. "Not family pressure, not misunderstanding, not financial necessity. Cowardice." He explained it in broken phrases. Sabrina had threatened to spiral, to run off, to disappear, to ruin her life. My mother panicked. He gave in. Then pride finished the rest. He told himself I would build a future anyway, told himself I would understand one day, told himself protecting the louder child was somehow a form of parental duty. He swallowed hard and looked at me. "It was not because you mattered less." I held his gaze. "It was because you believed I would suffer more quietly." Tears filled his eyes. He nodded, and somehow that hurt more than denial ever had. After that conversation, something changed in me. Not softness, structure. I called an elder law attorney recommended by one of the hospital social workers I knew. I scheduled a consultation. I gathered every bank statement, insurance form, medical directive, and debt notice I could find. If I was going to keep standing by my parents, I would not do it naively. I would not spend months holding them together just to watch Sabrina sweep in and convert their vulnerability into convenience. The attorney's name was Mara Levin, sharp-eyed, efficient, kind in the way competent women often are, without wasting a syllable. She came to the house 2 days after New Year's. She reviewed everything, asked direct questions, and understood the family pattern faster than I expected. By the end of the afternoon, we had started new power of attorney paperwork, medical directives, and protections against unauthorized property transactions. My mother signed first, hands shaking. My father signed slowly, jaw tight with shame. Sabrina was furious when she found out. She called me manipulative. She accused me of isolating our parents. She said I was trying to punish the family for old wounds. What she really meant was that the doors were closing on the shortcuts she had assumed would always remain open. I did not argue. I sent one message back. If you want to help, come help. If you want control, hire a lawyer. She did neither. And for the first time in our lives, my silence did not protect her. It protected me. Winter settled hard over Maple Hollow. The gutters froze. The porch steps crusted with ice. The old furnace groaned like it had complaints of its own. Inside the house, days became measured by medications, meals, and tiny victories. My father learning to hold a mug without spilling. My mother walking to the mailbox again after weeks of fatigue. A full night without anyone needing me at 2 a.m. I missed my apartment. I missed my hospital floor. I missed the life I had built out of sheer refusal. But somewhere in the middle of January, my mother brought down an old cedar box and placed it beside me at the kitchen table. "I need you to have these," she said. Inside were things I didn't expect. My original acceptance letter, the scholarship brochures I used to circle with a pen, a photo of me at 17 in my volunteer scrubs from the nursing home where I first decided what I wanted to become. And beneath them, a bundle of envelopes tied with faded ribbon. I opened one. It was addressed to me, never mailed. My mother had written it 14 years earlier. Then another, and another. Some were apologies she had apparently never been brave enough to send. Some were explanations that kept collapsing under their own weakness. One line appeared in more than one letter. I kept waiting for the right time to fix what we broke. I looked up at her. "There is no right time for that," I said. She nodded and wiped her eyes. "I know." For a while, we sat in silence, the kind that does not solve anything, but tells the truth more gently than words. In February, the hospital called again, not for my parents this time, but for me. My unit manager offered me another chance at the promotion I had ignored months earlier. She said they had delayed final selection. She said my record was strong. She said if I wanted the role, there might still be space. I walked outside onto the back porch with the phone pressed to my ear and looked at the bare trees behind the house. For a full minute, I said nothing. This is the part people never talk about when they praise loyalty. How often it asks for something unnamed, a postponed plan, a dimmed ambition, a version of your life you might have reached if no one had needed your hands first. I thought about saying yes. I thought about commuting, hiring more help, stretching myself until I split. Then I thought about my father falling in the bathroom while my mother struggled to lift him. I thought about the lawyer forms, the medication errors, the winter roads, the fact that even now Sabrina was mostly a voice note and a complaint. So I said what I did not want to say. "I can't do it right now." My manager was kind. That almost made it worse. When I hung up, I stood in the cold until my fingers hurt. Not because I regretted caring, because I was tired of always being the one whose dreams moved when everyone else collided with them. By March, my father had gained enough speech back to tell longer truths. Some evenings after dinner, while my mother napped in her chair, he would ask me to sit with him in the den. He told me things I had never known. How often he had wanted to call me during those first college years and didn't know how to speak without defending himself. How he had watched me become successful from a distance and used my independence as evidence that the damage must not have been that bad. How guilt can grow so large inside a person that they begin avoiding the very child they wronged because looking at her becomes unbearable. It was not redemption, but it was honest. One night, he said something that stayed with me. "You know the worst part?" he asked. I shook my head. We kept telling ourselves we were saving Sabrina, but really, we were feeding the part of her that believed consequences were for other people. I did not answer immediately because I knew he was right. Family favoritism does not only wound the neglected child, it cripples the favored one too. Sabrina had grown up expecting rescue, translation, and emotional weather control. Every time life refused her, she considered it betrayal. Every time someone set a boundary, she called it cruelty. And my parents had helped build that. Then my father looked at me and said, slowly and carefully, "You paid for all of it." That night, I cried in the laundry room where no one could hear me. Not because the pain was new, because someone had finally named its cost. Spring arrived in uneven pieces. Rain first, then softer air, then the first green returning to the backyard fence line. My mother grew stronger. My father grew steadier. Not healed, never that simple, but no longer in immediate freefall. And for a brief, fragile stretch, the house almost felt peaceful. Then Sabrina called to announce her engagement. I was standing at the stove stirring soup when my mother put the call on speaker by accident. Sabrina's voice spilled brightly through the kitchen. A ring, a rooftop dinner, a man named Adrian with investment ideas and excellent taste in hotels. My mother congratulated her automatically. My father forced out something that sounded like a blessing. Then Sabrina said, "Obviously, we'll need to talk about the house at some point. It could be a beautiful venue for an intimate engagement dinner." I closed my eyes. Even now, even after everything, she still looked at this family through the lens of staging. My mother surprised me. "No," she said. Sabrina laughed. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no," my mother repeated. "This house is not available for your plans." Silence. Then Sabrina's voice sharpened. "So Elena's in charge now?" My mother answered before I could. "No, reality is." After the call ended, the kitchen stayed still for a long moment. My mother sat down slowly and put both hands around her tea mug. "That should have come from me years ago," she whispered. I did not say thank you, but something in me unclenched anyway. A week later, a certified letter arrived from Sabrina's lawyer, not because she had any real legal claim, because entitlement often borrows the costume of process when it starts losing. The letter demanded access to financial records, questioned my influence over our parents, and hinted that I had manipulated them while they were medically vulnerable. I read it once, set it down, and laughed in pure disbelief. Some people are incapable of gratitude, even when someone is preserving the very people they abandoned. Mara Levin handled it with efficient contempt. She drafted a response, reminded Sabrina's attorney of the executed documents, and made clear that harassment would be documented. When my mother read the letter later that evening, she cried harder than I had seen since my father's stroke. "This is my fault," she said. "Yes," I answered. I did not say it cruelly, just plainly. She nodded through tears. Then my father asked for paper. His handwriting had become slow and crooked, but he wrote for almost an hour that night. 2 pages. He folded them into an envelope with Sabrina's name on the front. He never showed me what he wrote. He only said, "There are some truths a father owes a daughter, even late." She came by the following weekend to collect the letter. She left without hugging anyone. I watched from the front window as she sat in her car for 10 full minutes before driving away. She did not contact us for 3 months after that. The silence felt like clean air. In early summer, my father declined again. Recovery is cruel that way sometimes. It lets you believe stability means safety. Then one infection, one fall, one bad week, and the ground disappears again. He developed pneumonia and was admitted for 11 days. I barely left his room. At night, when machines softened to a low rhythm and hallway lights dimmed, he would ask me small, strange questions. Did I still take my coffee too sweet? Did I remember the science fair volcano we built in 8th grade? Did I know he used to sit in his truck outside my community college and watch students crossing campus because he didn't know how to come inside and say he was proud of me? That one hit hardest, not because it fixed anything, because it proved love had been there all along in some damaged, stunted form, and still had not been brave enough to protect me when it mattered. On his last lucid evening, he asked me to come closer. His voice was rough, but each word landed clean. "You were never easier to hurt," he said. "You were easier to trust with pain." And I abused that. I closed my eyes. He reached for my hand with the little strength he had left. "I am sorry for the life we made heavier." That was the apology I had waited half my life to hear, and maybe because it came without excuses, I believed it. He died 2 mornings later, just after sunrise, while rain tapped softly against the hospital window. I was the one holding his hand. Grief after a complicated parent dies is not clean. It does not arrive dressed in one emotion. It comes layered. Sorrow, relief, anger, tenderness, emptiness, memory. At the funeral, people said the usual things. He was a good man. He loved his family. He worked hard. All of which can be true and still incomplete. Sabrina arrived in black silk and dark glasses, late enough to be noticed and early enough to be photographed hugging our mother. She cried publicly, avoided me privately. Then, after the service, she cornered me near the church hall and said, "I hope you're not going to turn this into some kind of victory." I looked at her in disbelief. Our father just died. She shrugged with brittle anger. Everything always becomes about your suffering. There are moments when a family reveals itself so clearly that denial becomes impossible. I had spent years wondering whether Sabrina was damaged by favoritism or simply comfortable inside it. That day, I got my answer. I stepped closer and lowered my voice. This stopped being about me a long time ago. You just never noticed because you were busy measuring what was still available to take. She stared at me like I had slapped her. Then she walked away. And for the first time in my life, I felt no guilt at all. After the funeral, I expected my mother to collapse. Instead, grief made her startlingly clear. 3 days later, she asked Mara to come back to the house. We sat at the dining room table, the same table where my future had once been reassigned without my consent. My mother placed a folder in front of me. Inside were updated estate documents. The house would be sold only if she needed long-term medical care she could not otherwise afford. If that did not happen, it would pass to me. There was also a smaller account I had never known existed, one she and my father had quietly built over the years and never touched. Not enough to erase the past. Not enough to repay the full cost of what I lost. But enough to say, "We know we owe you." I stared at the papers without speaking. My mother looked at me with swollen eyes and a steadiness I had never seen from her before. "This is not payment for care," she said, "and it is not forgiveness bought on paper. It is accountability, late but real." I asked the only honest question I had. "Why now?" She answered immediately. "Because I spent too many years protecting the wrong person from consequences and the right person from nothing." I signed where I needed to acknowledge receipt. Not because I suddenly felt whole, because truth, even delayed truth, deserves to be documented. Sabrina exploded when she learned about the changes. Voicemails, emails, long messages full of outrage dressed up as moral concern. She called me manipulative again, called my mother confused, claimed stress and illness had distorted everyone's judgment. Then she tried a different tactic. She showed up, crying. She sat in the living room and told my mother she felt replaced, punished, excluded. For years, that approach had worked. This time, it didn't. My mother listened all the way through. Then she said quietly, "No one excluded you from being present. You made those choices yourself." Sabrina's face changed, not into pain, into disbelief. Because disbelief is what entitlement feels like when it finally collides with a boundary that does not move. She turned to me then, desperate for the old triangle, the old rescue. "You wanted this," she said. "No," I answered. "I wanted parents who didn't make children compete for fairness." She stood up so fast the chair legs scraped the hard wood. For a moment, she looked young again, not innocent, but unequipped. A person who had been overprotected from truth for so long that contact with it felt like violence. She left without saying goodbye. This time, neither of us ran after her. Sometimes breaking a family pattern feels less like a dramatic ending and more like a door closing gently and staying shut. Life after crisis is not cinematic. There is no perfect music swelling in the background while everyone learns their lesson. There are bills, follow-up appointments, grocery lists, laundry. Silence where a person used to breathe. My mother and I learned each other slowly after my father died, not as mythic figures, martyr daughter, regretful mother, but as two women standing in the wreckage of long choices. Some days were easier. We cooked together, we argued about salt, we watched old black and white movies while she folded towels too neatly. Other days, history came back sharp. A phrase, a room, a memory of Sabrina leaving for college in clothes my future had paid for. When that happened, I stopped pretending not to feel it, and my mother stopped asking me to. That mattered more than apology sometimes, the end of pressure to rush through pain for someone else's comfort. One evening in August, while we sat on the porch under a warm sky buzzing with cicadas, my mother said, "I used to confuse love with rescue." I turned to look at her. She kept her eyes on the yard. "I thought protecting Sabrina from disappointment was love. I see now it was fear. And I thought because you survived pain so well, you needed less from me. That may be the worst mistake I ever made." I let the words settle. Then I said, "Strength does not mean less need." She nodded slowly. "No," she whispered, "it doesn't." That fall, I returned to the hospital part-time, not the promotion track, not yet, but enough to feel my own life coming back into my hands. My mother hired daytime help twice a week. I insisted on it. Boundaries, I had learned, are not cruelty. They are maintenance for the soul. I also enrolled in an advanced certification course I had been postponing. The first night I logged into class, I sat in the old den with my laptop open and cried quietly before it began. Not because I was sad, because I had forgotten how it felt to choose myself, without guilt standing over my shoulder. Weeks later, a letter arrived from Sabrina. Actual paper, actual stamp, her handwriting. I stared at it for an hour before opening it. It was not a perfect letter. It was not even a fully honest one. But somewhere in the middle, she wrote a sentence that made me sit down. No one ever let me become responsible, and after a while, I started believing I never had to be. That was the closest she had ever come to truth. She did not ask for money. She did not ask for the house. She did not ask me to fix her life. She only wrote that she had started therapy and that Adrian had left after realizing she expected rescue from every hard feeling. For the first time, I felt something like pity without surrender. Healing, I learned, does not always mean reunion. Sometimes it just means the lies finally get named. A month before Christmas, my mother asked me to come with her to the bank. I assumed it was about routine paperwork. It wasn't. She opened a safety deposit box and handed me a thin packet wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a cashier's check and a note in my father's handwriting from before his final hospitalization. The amount was not equal to everything I had lost. No amount could be. But it was enough to pay for the advanced degree program I had once given up on. I looked at my mother, unable to speak. She smiled through tears. "He wanted to help you walk through a door he once helped close." I held that note so carefully it felt breakable. Back in the car, I read it twice. "Elena, if you ever decide there is still more you want to learn, go. Do not keep shrinking your life to fit inside what family failed to do for you. Love, Dad." I pressed the paper to my lap and looked out the window at a gray winter sky. People imagine justice as something loud, but sometimes it arrives softly. A corrected document, a sentence finally spoken plain. A mother who stops defending the indefensible. A father who tells the truth before the end. A future partially returned, not because the past can be erased, but because someone finally chose to stop lying about it. That day, for the first time, the word family did not feel like a wound in my mouth. It felt like work. Imperfect work, but real. I started my graduate program the following spring, part-time, slowly, on purpose. I drove to class twice a week after hospital shifts and returned to Maple Hollow on weekends to help my mother with errands, paperwork, and the kind of tasks that pile up faster when people age. It was not the life I once imagined at 18. But by then, I understood something I hadn't known when I was younger. A delayed future is not always a destroyed one. Sometimes, it is just a future that had to be wrestled back from other people's choices. Sabrina and I remained distant. There were occasional messages, careful ones, awkward ones, updates about therapy, a new job in event coordination, a tiny apartment she said she was paying for herself. I wished her well without stepping back into old roles. No rescuing, no financing, no emotional cleanup, just distance with honesty. And strangely, that was the healthiest our relationship had ever been. Meanwhile, my mother changed in small ways that mattered. She asked before assuming, thanked me without turning gratitude into dependence, told people publicly that I had carried the family when things fell apart. The first time I heard her say that to a neighbor, I stood very still in the kitchen and let the words move through me. Not because praise fixes childhood, but because truth told out loud has weight. And for once, it was being placed where it belonged. There is one memory I keep returning to when people ask, in the rare moments I let them, why I stayed. Why I still showed up after what my parents did to me. It was late one evening, months after my father died. My mother had fallen asleep in her recliner with a blanket over her knees. Rain was tapping softly against the windows. The house was warm, quiet, ordinary. I was rinsing 2 teacups at the sink when I caught my reflection in the dark glass. And suddenly, I understood something that had taken me years to say clearly. I did not stay because my parents earned it. I stayed because I refused to let their worst decision determine the kind of person I would become. That does not mean people should accept abuse. It does not mean blood excuses betrayal. It does not mean sacrifice without limit is noble. It means I chose care with boundaries, truth with documentation, compassion without self-erasure. I stood by them when they needed me most, not to prove they had been right about me being strong, but to prove they had been wrong to think my strength belonged to them. It never did. It belonged to me. And once I understood that, everything changed. Now, I am 33. My mother lives in a smaller townhouse 10 minutes from me. I finished that advanced degree last year. I finally accepted a leadership role at the hospital. My apartment has better windows now, a better coffee maker too. Some nights, after late shifts, I sit alone in my kitchen and think about that 18-year-old girl at the dining room table, holding an acceptance letter, while her family decided she could absorb the loss. I wish I could go back and tell her this. They were wrong about what strength means. Strength is not being the child who suffers quietly so everyone else can stay comfortable. Strength is naming the wound honestly. Strength is building anyway. Strength is helping when you choose to, not because guilt chained you there. Strength is refusing to let bitterness be the only inheritance they leave you. If you have ever been the dependable one in a family that confused your resilience for permission to neglect you, I hope you hear me clearly. You are not easier to hurt just because you know how to survive. You are not less deserving because you ask for less. And if the people who were supposed to protect you failed, that failure belongs to them, not to your worth. That is the truest thing I know.